Let's dive into one of the most interesting case studies I've ever had. And with that, let me introduce you to my little bigger brother, Davis. And Davis is, gosh, he's say 5 years younger than me, so he's mid 30s, and at the point of this recording. And so Davis had a very difficult upbringing. He was diagnosed with ADHD very early on and through school, and it was kind of, looking back on it, I definitely was fit the criteria for the same diagnosis, but it hadn't been to the point where medical doctors were influencing educators so much as they are now with medicating children. So unfortunate for Davis, but fortunate for me, I was never medicated for ADHD, but Davis was. He was diagnosed, and then he was put on medication, which left him in kind of a zombie state throughout elementary school, high school, to the point where he even failed his senior year of high school, and then had to redo his last year. And so then he gets through high school. He has his high school diploma as a super senior, and he goes into the military and to serve our country and selflessly devote a good chunk of his life. And so he was a military police for 8 years. And for 8 years, he served multiple tours in Iraq, has been in open firefights and conflict. And he then gets out of the military. And that was about 8 years ago. And so for the last 8 years, he has lived in a status of stuckness, or also a dimly lit existence, and meaning he has been largely unemployed, had a difficult time maintaining any jobs, had a difficult time even being independently living. So he's at the point where last year when the story began, he was living with our dad and my dad's wife. And Davis, since getting out of the military, had gained 80 something pounds. And so, I had just gotten back from the Dominican Republic for our first trip. And, having that profound, like, reset, relief, reprieve, presence of God, touch of the Holy Spirit, whatever term you want to use. I'd probably the Holy Spirit's best, because it oftentimes talks about the Holy Spirit being a breath or moving through you. And I just immediately had this hypothesis that this place was so similar to the Garden of Eden. Anyone who comes here couldn't help but experience profound healing. And because, just again, back to the idea of taking an animal out of captivity and put it in the natural environment, they just immediately become healthier. And so Davis, I've seen him on this downhill spiral of his health and his life for almost a decade. And so I called Davis and I said, Davis, dude, like, are you actually happy with the way your life is? He goes, no. And so they said, well, are you ready for an adventure then? And he said, yeah. I said, okay, we'll get a passport, and then let's send you down to the Dominican Republic. We just bought this property. And at the point of this conversation, he has no idea about this place. He didn't even know there was buildings here. So he just was like, all right, I am at a place, and to me, that symbolizes a rock bottom, because really for 8 years, he had used alcohol and food to self-medicate in order to then cope with PTSD. And so in my perspective, it was at rock bottom when he was saying, I'm willing to walk away and just go into the jungle, right? Crazy. So he does. So 5 weeks later, he was getting on a plane to fly out to live in the Dominican Republic. And I had this idea. The idea was that he was going to come here, and then all of a sudden, like, the negativity of his thought patterns, the laziness, I hate to say that, and again, now I can understand the neuroanatomy. An overactive amygdala, there's 3 responses: fight, flight, freeze, right? And he was just stuck in a freeze response. So I shouldn't say laziness. but I'm his brother, so I can. And so I thought that would just go away magically, and very much it did not. We followed suit. We came here in June, and he, for the month that he lived here by himself, he had lost weight. He was put on that. We put him on a Dominican diet, which is rice, beans, and then whatever food is growing here locally. Is I just thought, if he is getting fresh air, if he is eating clean food, he's no longer relying on his vices to cope. I thought he would make these breakthroughs, and somehow his personality that I have grown to love, and also love in the way that brothers love each other, you bother the heck out of each other. I thought somehow that those quirks that would go away, right? His little personality things that just bother me. The only way that a brother can bother another brother. And so I to be honest, I started to get a little frustrated, because I thought, you know what, maybe this is not the key. Maybe I had this whole hypothesis wrong, because here we are. Davis has been submerged in nature. Oh yeah, he's lost, at that point it was 20 pounds. But I mean, a lot of the stuckness, he, to me, didn't seem like it had made a difference. And so he could not do basic tasks. I mean, he was in the military before, so he could stand and protect an area, but besides that, basic skills he didn't have. But then what I started doing is I started to performing 3 to 5 chiropractic adjustments on him a day while he was here. And then I thought, well, then he's going to be feeling better, because you get adjusted, you feel better. That's what everyone says, and that's what I experienced myself. And then it just seems like his quirks are more amplified. But however, he started to slowly pick up tasks. He started to be able to paint and then help out with basic construction things around the property. And it got to the point where his 3 goals, and we talked about this before he even came out here, was to lose weight, to detox, and then to be able to purchase a vehicle. And so we got to a point where he had been here for 3 months, and I sat back down with him and said, okay, Davis, so you've lost 57 pounds. And while he was here over the 4 months, you've detoxed. You are now here, and you've accomplished your first 2 goals. I said, I don't know how we can help you accomplish this 3rd goal of buying a new vehicle. And so I think it may be a good time to head back home, and then work towards that 3rd goal. And this is where Davis's story gets so interesting, and where it just opens up the question of what the heck happened. Because before he left here, before he flew home, go back to Washington State, he, on his own volition, I didn't coach him through it. And again, I'm all for taking credit. So if any of these words that have helped you, and you can message me and say, hey, Dr. Brossard, when you said XYZ, that really resonated with me, and I was able to use it to benefit my life this way. I love hearing that. I love hearing feedback. I also appreciate feedback on the opposite of, you droned on about this point too much. I don't maybe expressively appreciate it as much as I do praise, but I learn from it, which is even more valuable on how to best serve you, of course. And so Davis, before he leaves here, he calls Amazon and he gets an interview set up to work in the new warehouse in Arlington, Washington. The first week he's back, he ends up interviewing for that position, and then ends up getting a $3,000 signing bonus. But then this is where it gets even more interesting on a God level, because the day we talked, we about sending him back to Washington, we picked a date that he would leave. It was like 2-3 weeks or something like that. And so he then calls our dad, and he says, hey, I'm coming back home, and I'll be back on this date. And he said, I wanted to ask you a question. Would it be possible to buy your car from you, to my dad? And my dad said, well, the funny thing is actually right now we're heading to the dealership to go trade in this vehicle that it was Kathy, his wife's car, and they're not going to give us very much money with it. Davis, would you give us fair market value for it if you get a job and if you can? And so he said, great. So, I mean, this is how incredible God works. I mean, really, that is only a God thing, right? He defined his 3 goals, and those 3 goals now have come true because he came back to Washington. He started at Amazon. Within 6 weeks, he became the top producer in the entire warehouse. On Thanksgiving, when we were back in Washington for holidays, we were doing the Turkey Trot 5K in Arlington, and so Davis is now doing these races and exercising, and he tells me, hey Devin, one of my managers came up to me and he said, we have this manager training course, and he asked me if I was to sign up for it, and I said no, it's already filled up. And they said, well, you don't have to sign up for it because we already put you into it. And so he's now, in less than a year, on track for manager training, and has gone through the first several levels of that, lives on his own, has fully paid off the vehicle, and is in a far different place than he was less than a year ago. And so this is the thing that's so fascinating. I mean, I hope to dive deeper as we experience more patients' transformation as they come here and receive this neurointensive chiropractic experience, is that what is happening within the brain, where you can take a PTSD vet who is stuck for 8 years, gained 80 pounds, and within 1 year, he is now the top producing person in an entire warehouse and has accomplished 3 of his primary goals in less than a year. Because again, going back to the brain is so fast that it solves problems before you've even identified them as problems. He came up with solutions to getting unstuck and then becoming a productive human being without even talking about it, without even thinking about it. So that's the thing that needs to be dove into and better understanding in order to then fully understand and appreciate this power that God puts inside of us that's locked in place, that if we simply can release it, our brain, through that prefrontal cortex, through that God center of the brain, can start to direct our life rather than us thinking, that amygdala, again, that emotional part of the brain, thinking that it's so smart. Because Davis didn't think through. He just did it. And I just asked him, so Davis, how'd you come up with a plan? I just knew what I had to do, and I did it.